Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Better Buildings Summer Webinar Series, where we highlight the best practices for Better Buildings Challenge and Alliance partners and other organizations working to improve energy efficiency. Next slide. Our webinar today I'm looking forward to is called Workplace Evolution, Supporting Occupant Health While Achieving Energy Efficiency. So today we're going to be exploring the connections between energy efficiency and occupant health and unveil strategies for maximizing impact in the evolving CRE market. We have a whole host of industry partners here today to talk about their experiences and how they've been able to make decisions and make progress with the health energy nexus, especially over the very challenging last year and a half or 2 years. Next slide. My name is Hannah Debelius, and I'm in the Building Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. And I'm very pleased to be moderating your session today on behalf of the Better Buildings program. However, I'd also like to start out by introducing the tool we'll be using today. We're going to be using an interactive platform that's called Slido, and we'll be doing both polls and also taking Q&A here. So right now, if you could open up either your mobile device or another browser window and go to www.slido.com, you are then going to enter the event code DOE. So again, go to slido.com and enter the event code DOE, and that's how you're going to be able to access this tool. I'll give you just a moment to do that. All right, so at any time during the session, you can use this tool to put in a question, and you'll also be able to, once you see that list of questions, go ahead and like or give a little thumbs up to the questions that you like, and over the session, those will rise to the top, and so we'll be able to prioritize those for our panelists. And in this session in particular, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so I hope that you start inputting those now. However, we'd like to start with a little poll that, again, also uses this tool. So on slido.com, you can enter DOE, and that's how you're going to interact with us. So we can go ahead and launch the first poll. This is just a little pulse check where we are curious how many of you are back in the office full time. And, you know, we know that the focus on health and energy efficiency has really been catalyzed by the last 2 years. And so this is just a little pulse check for our audiences. So a lot of you not that yet, but planning to return. And actually, a lot of you also know but part-time, or about a quarter know with no plans to return. And I think what this really speaks to is that evolving workplace piece of our session today, where we know that commercial real estate properties and office buildings have evolved a lot, and the demands for space size or space type have really changed. All right, thanks. We're going to move on to our second poll here, which is going to ask you to put on your professional hat again for the things that you're thinking about. We are curious to know, what are your organization's current priorities in relationship to health, operations, and energy efficiency? And you can choose all that apply here. I think a lot of people coming out the gate, clicking them all. We know there's a lot to consider right now at the health energy nexus, and so we'll dive into a lot of these today. So rising to the top is communicating a safe return to work. And I think that's interesting because for some of you, that's probably a different hat than you're usually used to wearing about your building operations. And so I think that's something we could probably ask our panelists about. Wellness rises to the top, and that's probably true for existing buildings, and maybe considering for design and how your priorities for designing of the design of buildings has changes. All right, and then some classics, IAQ, ventilation, and filtration. All right, thank you. We're going to launch our last poll today before we get into our panelists. And that one is, when making building operations decisions at the nexus of health and energy efficiency, who are the stakeholders involved? This is a short answer, so it's an open answer, and these could be stakeholders that are inside your organization, such as an HR representative or executive, or it could also be stakeholders outside of your organization. Members of local government, employees, executives and C-suite, certainly. Yes, tenants. Tenants and landlords, we know that particularly over the last year and a half, those conversations between tenants and landlords in regards to health and that safe return to work that you also indicated on these polls is risen to the top. Union officials, excellent. A health and safety officer, that's interesting. I'm curious how many people also work with a health and safety officer in their buildings. A lot of facilities personnel or facilities leadership and board members. Excellent. Well, it's clear that you all have your work cut out for you because this is a lot of stakeholders, and we know that it's been tough. But what we're seeing overall is that a lot of our partners are considering the intersection of health and energy efficiency a priority. So we're interested to hear more about that. So with that, I think we will close our poll. Thank you very much for all of you who participated in that. And again, you can continue to keep Slido open because that's where you'll be submitting your Q&A for the whole portion of this. We have a whole suite of panelists with us today representing different industry organizations and organizations directly. So we'll spend some time hearing from each of these wonderful panelists, sharing a little bit more about their story. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end, again, for that discussion and Q&A. So with that, I'd like to invite Larissa Oaks to join us on video. She's the Indoor Environmental Quality Specialist at the U.S. Green Building Council. She manages technical development and maintenance of the Indoor Environmental Quality Credit Category and LEED. Larissa is interested in how the quality of the built environment impacts our health, effectiveness, and overall happiness. So with that, Larissa, please take it away.
Great, thanks Hannah, and hi everyone. So as Hannah mentioned, today I'm going to be speaking from my perspective with my work at the U.S. Green Building Council and really the experiences that I've had with working with buildings during the pandemic, specifically related to navigating LEED certification. Next slide. So to explain kind of how we in LEED balance energy and health, the LEED rating system has 7 goals that outline what we're looking for a LEED project to accomplish, and these goals are the foundation for how LEED points are allocated to the green building strategies that are included in the rating system. And so of these 7 goals, the first 2, climate change and human health, have the most weight. So 35% for climate change and 20% for human health. And this allocation process ensures that when we're assigning points to credits in the rating system, we're rewarding projects for the actions that are taken to reduce global climate change as well as enhancing individual human health. And this also encourages really finding solutions that contribute to more than one goal. So for example, energy savings can contribute to reducing global climate change as well as improving indoor air quality or air quality, which enhances human health. Next slide. So how have things changed for us in the past 18 months? In February of this year, we launched our annual community survey to gather feedback from the USGBC community. And this year's survey was focused on COVID-19 recovery and how the green building industry can thrive post-pandemic. And one finding from this survey was that members see more demand for buildings to promote a healthy environment for occupants. And more people understand the link between buildings and the environment and how the connection impacts individual health and wellness. In this survey, our members indicated that they would like USGBC to focus on health and wellness in 2021. So that was really the top priority that they suggested we focus on. And regarding opportunities for the green building industry due to the pandemic, the top responses that we received were increasing monitoring of indoor air quality and focusing on innovative ventilation strategies. Next slide. So one of the biggest challenges that we had during the pandemic and continue to have is identifying what indoor air quality strategies are most supportive for reducing virus transmission and what will continue to benefit buildings after the pandemic. Next. And the way that we've been exploring these challenges is primarily through a pilot credit. So the pilot credit process allows us to learn more from project teams as they implement new ideas. And in this case, they're implementing improvements to their buildings for indoor air quality during the pandemic with the goal of reducing virus transmission indoors. It's still kind of early in the learning phase with this pilot credit, but we have implemented one revision of the requirements earlier this year to incorporate initial feedback that we've received, which was that many LEED buildings are finding it more feasible and energy efficient to improve their filtration or add air cleaners rather than increasing the amount of outdoor air that they're bringing in. And for LEED, we've historically focused a lot on filtration of outdoor air pollutants, not as much on filtration of the indoor air, recirculated air. So during the pandemic and kind of through this pilot process, we recognized that more emphasis was needed on filtration of recirculated air in the LEED rating system. And we did actually add this strategy to our enhanced indoor air quality strategies credit for the design and construction projects. During this pilot process, we're also interested in understanding the best way to evaluate and score energy performance. So prior to the pandemic, LEED buildings had much more stable occupancy, whereas now the occupancy is more variable, and in many cases, it's been significantly reduced. And generally for buildings that have significantly reduced their occupancy, we're seeing that they've not been able to reduce their energy use by as much. So these projects are then receiving lower energy, LEED energy performance scores than they were previously. And so for this next phase of the pilot credit, we hope to get more feedback from projects that are really improving their energy efficiency while adjusting their air quality strategies to be more responsive to the occupancy changes that are happening and will continue to happen, and to the health needs in the building. I'm going to stop there and pass it back to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Larissa. We really appreciate that perspective. That's a little bit unique from our other panelists. Thanks so much. I will also say that you got a couple of questions that came in for the Q&A there on Slido that we'll address at the end, but if people are interested, they can go ahead and click the like or the thumbs up button on that, and we'll move it to the top. With that, we'd now like to welcome Jim Landau, who's the Director of Environmental, Social, and Governance for MetLife Investment Management's Real Estate Equity, Debt, and Agriculture Finance Division. He oversees initiatives that include on-site renewable installations, energy and water efficiency in existing buildings, and new developments and assessing the impact of climate change and resiliency for new equity and debt investments. Excellent. Jim, thanks so much, and please take it away.
You want to go next slide? Yeah, just really briefly. So I'm with MetLife Investment Management, and we manage MetLife's investment real estate portfolio. That's equity and debt. We also, of course, have a corporate sustainability team that oversees our corporate offices around the world. Just wanted to show really quickly, these are the goals, the new 2030 goals that we published about 6 months ago that are available publicly, and they include both on the investment side and the corporate side. And just a few of them that I wanted to point out. One, reducing GHG emissions by 30% between 2019 and 2030. And that's not the focus of this webinar, but happy to answer any questions about that. Achieving green or healthy building certifications in 40% of our global office portfolio. And that includes both on the corporate side and the investment side. We're pursuing both well where feasible and fit well programs. $20 billion of new managed green investments. That's both new equity investments and new commercial mortgage originations. We've got about a $25 billion equity portfolio and about a $75 billion commercial mortgage loan portfolio. And in a given year, we originate $12 to $14 billion of new commercial mortgage loans. And we're not going to really talk about the debt side right now because there's very little we can do there. But it is interesting to note that we're talking more and we're doing more in terms of working with our borrowers and sponsors, both in terms of understanding, not only where they stand at origination, but each year during the loan term, and trying to track what they're doing in terms of certifications. And while we don't have a lot of impact to, tell them what to do, we think just by engaging in the conversation and getting annual updates is going to help spur change, both in terms of energy and greenhouse gas emissions and health and wellness. The last goal, power all of our MIM, manage and control real estate investments with 100% renewable energy. I'm actually happy to report that we're 25% of the way there as of 2020. And just with programs that are in place already, solar installations, green power purchases, that sort of thing, we'll be above 30% next year. And we think that's a good platform to start with. Next slide, please. So in terms of COVID, one of the first things we did, and I know we're not unique here, but we put together a task force. I ran it, back last April, when we all thought that this would be over and done, come last summer, right? And we, it's important to note that we're not like a REIT. We don't manage our own property. We have third-party managers for all of our assets. And that includes office, high-rise, low-rise, mid-rise, suburban, urban office. Same thing with multifamily, retail, hotels, large industrial warehouses, data centers, that sort of thing. So it's a pretty diverse portfolio around the U.S. So we put together essentially two sets of guidelines or considerations. We debated. Legal told us we couldn't use the word guidelines, considerations. That we distributed to all of our third-party managers. And we built this, we wrote this with the help of our third-party managers. So we had an internal task force. We have consultants that we use already, ESG consultants. And for the office document, we brought in some of the chief national engineers with CBRE and Cushman and JLL. They all produced their own documents, as did Transwestern and Lincoln and other firms. And we reread all of that, and we had a lot of discussion, and we put together this document. We did the same thing on the multifamily side, working with partners like Bozzuto and Greystar for their help and assistance. And at the end of the day, the goal was to really just put all of the best information and best practices that we could assemble in a fairly concise form in front of our teams, and then encourage them to think about what works for their tenant base, their geographic location. Are their tenants coming to work? Are they not, there at all? Is it a retail property that's essentially, not getting a lot of action? Our hotels, many of them were closed in entirety for several months, or had average occupancies ranging from 3 to 10%, in very limited services. So it really varied by property type and by geography, but essentially, just really a lot of conversation and a lot of feedback, going both ways. And my last slide. It's just an example of one of our office buildings in Seattle. And again, working with our team, by the way, I should add that we have an internal architecture and engineering team. So we have a dedicated architect in each of our 7 regions around the US. And they're working closely with our asset management team, the ESG team, and all of our third-party managers, and in many cases directly with tenants, particularly where tenants occupy the majority, or in many cases the entirety of a building, to figure out what works for them, how many of their people are coming in. And again, we're not experts on UV lights or bipolar ionization, or other technologies, but we assembled, talking to all of the experts that we work with internally and externally, the best information, best practices. We worked with EPA and DOE teams, and we just put this information out there. In some cases they were tested, in other cases they weren't, but But again, the goal was get good information out there. We sent surveys to many of our tenants at the end of 2020, asking simple questions. Are you happy with the building? Are you happy with owners' efforts to manage the building during this stressful period? And we get great feedback. At the end of the day, feedback in almost no instance came back with, we're thrilled that you used MER 15 filters, or we're thrilled that you used bipolar ionization or had portable filters in the lobbies. The feedback was generally, thank you for engaging with us. Thank you for asking us, what we were doing within our premises, how building ownership could help. And again, it was really communication, putting best practices out there, and then just communicating and sharing that across the platform. And that's it for me, Hannah.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jim. Next up, we have Dana. Dana Robin Schneider is the Senior Vice President, Director of Energy, Sustainability, and ESG for Empire State Realty Trust. Dana is responsible to define, lead, and execute a comprehensive program for all company and property level energy and sustainability initiatives, and to coordinate and develop the company's ESG and wellness programs and reporting. So thanks so much for joining us, Dana, and go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks, Hannah. So thanks everybody for joining today. My work at Empire State Realty Trust and our focus here is literally to balance healthy buildings with energy efficiency. So I was excited when Hannah asked if I would talk on this panel. I think a lot of the speakers today were in the same position as we were, which is that, we were faced with a completely unpredictable situation starting in March of 2020. And we had to, stand on our feet and figure out a way to ensure that our own employees, as well as our tenants, as they began to come back to the office, would be healthy, would be safe, that we were doing all we could to do that for them, and to balance that with our very aggressive commitment to energy efficiency in our spaces. And so, as Empire State Realty Trust, we've been leaders in energy efficiency and indoor environmental quality for well over a decade. We really started these initiatives in 2007, portfolio-wide. So we have indoor environmental quality measures, which we've actually had in place for quite some time here. We have bipolar ionization, which we began rolling out in 2012 in our portfolio. And then we also have MER 13 filters in 100% of our air handling units. That was a big, it's been our standard for a long time. We actually verified every single unit that we control across every single building. We have had a long-standing standard for no and low volatile organic compounds in cleaning materials and construction materials, adhesives, paints, sealants, carpets, you name it. No and low VOCs, and we also actually don't allow materials on the red list. And then we also have aggressive water quality testing, temperature testing, which I don't think is covered as much during the pandemic, but which I wanted to add here because healthy spaces are not just about air quality, daylight views, things like that. They're also all about water plays a big role here. We did quite a bit of research and rollouts there as well. And so things like the filtration, the low and no VOCs, the red list, even the bipolar ionization, the active air purification are things that we've had as standards for a long time. And those things were part of what we call our high performance, healthy, sustainable guidelines. We apply these to every single lease. For design, for construction, and then we go back and do audits and let our tenants know what opportunities we see for them to continually improve not only their energy efficiency, but their indoor environmental quality. So at the same time, we look for things like equipment that's left on when no one's there, or lights that are left on, if the controls aren't working correctly, or advanced BMS capabilities and algorithmic software programs for optimization, we're also looking at the indoor environmental quality holistically. We have goals for carbon neutrality for the Empire State Building by 2030, for the whole portfolio by 2035. And we never compromise health for efficiency. You can do both. In fact, we're committed to doing both. And just, going back to some of the questions that you guys saw in the very beginning, we were actually the first portfolio, the first commercial building in the Americas to achieve the WELL Health Safety Rating. We were awarded the WELL Health Safety Rating for our entire portfolio, including the Empire State Building's Observatory in September 2020. And that, I think, is extremely important. And if there are questions about that, I think it'd be great to have a discussion around why we chose to pursue a WELL Health Safety Rating. It was extremely important for us not only to say that we had done all these things, but to use one of the leading international standards, a very rigorous standard that's science-based and medically based, to demonstrate from a third party who verified what we had implemented, not just that we had these policies in place. So I think that things like that are really important. Next. So we've learned a lot of lessons. I think everybody has during the pandemic, and obviously it's been a horrible tragedy globally. And hopefully we can also use this to learn lessons that help us moving forward. There has to be some silver lining of what we've all gone through together. So some of the lessons that we've learned is that indoor environmental quality is a top priority for tenants and for prospective tenants, for our employees, for all the building occupants. We prioritize clean air, healthy buildings, increased ventilation, like I said, the filtration, the increased testing of air and water. We're piloting real-time IEQ sensors, really trying to stay ahead of this. And I think that based on surveys that we've seen, not only of our own occupants, our own tenants, but also from professional real estate service firms like JLL, CBRE, Cushman, they're all finding that indoor environmental quality is a huge priority and question, not only for tenants, prospects, occupants, but especially with younger people. And we actually just had a presentation right before this from our summer interns. And this is one of the biggest things that they kept talking about was indoor environmental quality, sustainability, healthy buildings. So I thought that was an interesting firsthand insight from the interns, the younger professionals. We also observed that tenant energy usage often did not increase to align with occupancy levels. And I think that Larissa mentioned this. This was not entirely unexpected as someone like me who's focused on energy efficiency and sustainability for over 20 years. I knew that it wouldn't be a 1-to-1 ratio, but I was actually surprised in a portfolio where we focused so intensely on efficiency that it wasn't more of a pronounced reduction in energy usage, given all the measures that we do have in place. Because these buildings were still occupied, even during lockdown, when there were 5 people in a building that normally has 10,000, we still have to meet lease obligations, right? Even if one person came to one floor, it couldn't be 85 degrees in their space in the summer or 50 degrees in their space in the winter, right? We'd be in default. So it's interesting to see the impact of HVAC set points. But even more interesting for us was what we saw on plug loads. So we really have been working on plug load control technologies, affordable plug load control technologies. It's one of the requirements of our guidelines for our tenants to use plug load controls, but it's not code in most places. And what we see is through some of the tests and pilots we've done, opportunities for 67% plus reduction in the plug loads that are just left on when no one's there. We actually walked through our tenant spaces and tried to address some of these issues where no one was in the space for an extended period. But we saw the lighting controls might not be working right, that monitors and all kinds of equipment was left on with nobody there. And the pandemic is basically a case of like what your overnights and weekends look like all the time, right? When people are not supposed to be there, all of this equipment stays on. It's a huge energy waste. And there's lots of ways, strategies, technologies, approaches, behaviors that can improve that. And another thing that lesson that we learned is that there's a huge impact of legislation. You know, we talk a lot about the carrot and the stick. I think that, you know, I'm based in New York City. I'm in New York City now in our office. And in New York City, we have Local Law 97, which is the most stringent climate legislation in the world for buildings. I think a lot of you on the call are probably aware of this. And Local Law 97 commits New York City to the Paris Accord, to an 80 by 50 reduction with stringent caps on carbon emissions for buildings, which begin January 1, 2024, and become more and more stringent for significant reductions by 2035 in alignment with the state's CLCPA goals for a more renewable grid. And so I think that, you know, you'll see, we obviously as an owner have begun to work towards energy efficiency requirements for the legislation, but I think that these requirements of code requirements will be a huge driver and will actually help drive consistent results. Next. And so another thing that we want to talk about is a success story, you know, that we can get through this and we can demonstrate the balance of sustainability, energy efficiency, and a healthy building. The Empire State Building's observatory experience was the first New York City observatory and one of the first cultural institutions allowed to reopen. We were given permission to reopen in July of 2020, so a year ago. I can't believe that was a year ago. But we had to demonstrate to the governor and his team our industry-leading safety protocols, what we had in place, our indoor environmental quality, the Department of Health guidelines, everything that we had done with our ventilation, which in the top of the Empire State Building Observatory on the 102nd floor, where our air changes are over 26 times an hour. We have MERV 13 filters, we have bipolar ionization, and in addition to that, we don't introduce the VOCs. We had a rigorous cleaning protocol that was green cleaning that also met the CDC guidelines for proven effectiveness against COVID, and mask wearing and distancing. We operated with timed tickets, which we still have, although we're up in our occupancy, which is amazing, but we still do the timed tickets. It reduces the wait time and it also keeps people spaced out. We were doing temperature checks, facial covering, social distancing. We no longer have to do those things, but we did that for a year. And so I would say, in closing, we were able to balance this super efficient building and also make sure that it was safe as possible, especially for the reopening of the observatory, which we see as the reopening of New York. And it's a success story for the balance. I think that's the last slide, Pam.
Yep, excellent. Thanks so much, Dana. And I always love hearing about the Empire State Building in particular, even I know your portfolio is much larger than that. Last for our panelists before we go into Q&A, we have Kim Pexton, who joined JBG Smith as Vice President, Sustainability. She is leading the strategy, development, coordination, and execution of JBG Smith's sustainability initiatives across all business units. Throughout her career, Ms. Pexton has been responsible for the development of operational programs that yield demonstrated sustainability results. So thanks so much, and Kim, go for it.
Thanks for having me here. Just to calibrate folks as to who JBG Smith is, we are an owner and operator and developer of commercial and multifamily office space and multifamily in the DC metro area specifically. We manage with existing assets of about 20 million square feet, and we have about equally as much in our future development pipeline. So over the next 10 to 20 years, as we work to operationalize and develop those properties, we're going to double our portfolio. So when we start to think about, informing and impacting the built environment, we do focus on our operational assets, and a lot of folks here today have shared their experiences, et cetera. So I'll try not to go through those same things. Just sharing with you that JBG Smith, really our philosophy has always been that green buildings are healthy buildings, and they have been for a really long time. As Larissa had mentioned at the top of these discussions, human health has been a focus in green building rating systems. And really over the last handful of years, and certainly with the onset of the pandemic, that really has boiled that human health component up for all of us. I think that, something important, and everyone here has touched on it today, but I think that, when you're looking at the various things and various suggestions, at the forefront of the pandemic, there were a lot of experts, a lot of health professionals coming out and providing very useful and helpful strategies, et cetera. When it comes to the built environment, those things really kind of boil down to a handful of things. It's cleaning and disinfecting protocols. It's indoor air quality management. It's ventilation. It's filtration, touchless tech in buildings, and also the attention to detail of the types of materials and things like that, and cleaning products that you might be using within the built environment. And that's really, as you've heard here today, that's really where all of us sort of landed on focusing our attention. Our approach at JBG Smith is looking very specifically at balancing the green building, energy efficiency, health and wellness, and smart technologies across not just our existing and operational assets, but as I mentioned, new development. So as we move on to the next slide, please. Thought it would be really interesting for this, not just to share some of the lessons learned over the past 18 months, because they are very they're very similar to the experiences that have been shared with you by others today. But some of you in the audience might be wondering exactly what those impacts look like from a real number perspective. So what I did here was I just took some quick little snapshots from our ESG annual report from 2000, reporting on 2019 data, and then our 2020 data, which specifically is in that we'll call it pandemic year, for lack of a better term. But just looking at these quick squint testing, that lower tier, those are the numbers that we're used to experience. We'll call in a normalized year. We're used to experiencing almost a 4% reduction in energy consumption. That's via capital expenditure projects that have been deployed. That's also via our controls-based related programming done through our central clearinghouse of energy management, where we're running demand response related programming with utility companies. We're implementing chiller coasting programs, et cetera, and so forth. So that bottom tier is what we're used to seeing. That upper tier is what we experienced in 2020 with COVID-related operations. So increased ventilation in our across our office portfolio. Interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, we do have this. It's not a 1-to-1 split. It's not a 50-50 split between office and multifamily. But some of the things that we actually learned from a multifamily perspective is that reductions in energy efficiency were actually realized, even though people were working from home, et cetera, and so forth. But we had amenity spaces that were closed, certain common areas that were closed, and really, reducing the energy then that is associated with running those particular specialty operations within the building, realized some significant energy reduction. As we work, in the coming months, as CDC is changing protocols, and as we're all returning to the office place, and we're opening in our multifamily spaces more of our amenity spaces, we actually are going to take a lot of these lessons learned, and we're already incorporating them into our plans for operations for those buildings. Multifamily, we're looking at those fitness centers. Do they need to be, lit and cooled all day long, 24 hours a day? No, they don't. So we'll be, again, working to incorporate those elements into our operational portfolio. Next slide. Also, too, there was a point in time during the pandemic, and certainly speaking with a lot of our commercial real estate peers, they were experiencing the same, where our investment committees and our executives had put maybe a temporary pause on capital expenditure spending. We went through maybe a 3 or 4 month period of doing that, but then actually the sustainability team went back to our investment committee and said, hey, we think that this is really a great opportunity to deploy various energy efficiency projects while some tenants may not necessarily be in their spaces in the office environment. So we really worked to leverage that time. We got that capital expenditure dollar pause actually lifted specifically for energy efficiency related projects, and worked to push those forward. So that was kind of a great success and great use of time. We retrofitted lighting in our garage in probably 6 or 7 of our different operational office assets. We were able to go in and replace lighting, etc. We also have taken the opportunity to hone in and focus on establishing performance targets. In 2020, we did an analysis of our entire portfolio, and we were able to come out with a really clear understanding at the asset level of specific plans to achieve specific performance targets. Reduction of energy consumption by 25%, reduction of carbon emissions by 25%, et cetera, and so forth. So we took advantage of some of that unintended downtime, if you will, to do some more of these in-depth studies and come up with very specific asset plans. We also, in the spirit of health and wellness, we did take the opportunity to leverage our really robust indoor air quality testing and water testing protocols, and what we had already traditionally been doing by way of policy across our operational assets. And we did certify all our entire, at the entity level, our entire office portfolio via the Fitwel viral response. And then we did that in October. And then as of July 5th this year, each of our individual assets have been certified under the Fitwel viral response. So just a kind of a hodgepodge of taking what we're doing from a health and wellness perspective, and just ways that we were able to continue to put people first, and that environment also balance those objectives. So with that, I will go ahead and kick it back to Hannah.
Great, thanks, Kim. And Kim, you can keep your video on, and I'd like to invite the other panelists back to join us on video. Thank you all so much. We have a lot of questions, so I hope to get to as many as we can. And it's not too late to either add a question, or also, again, you can hit that thumbs up, and it'll help to move a question up to a higher priority list. And I want to, for our panelists, you all are welcome to answer any of these questions, but also, in order to get through more of them, don't feel like you have to jump in on all of them. our first question here had 10 votes, so it was actually incredibly popular. So we'll start with that one, which is when it comes to decision making to balance energy efficiency and wellness priorities, what do you see as a permanent trend that will last through the return to work phase? For this, I think I'm going to ask Dana to kick it off if you're ready, only because, Dana, I remember you mentioning that a lot of your initiatives started in 2012 or 2013. So I'm curious your perspective on this, and then I'll open it up to any of the other panelists.
So this is a great question. I wish I had my glasses on because so the balance of energy efficiency and wellness, I think that is the trend. I hope that, and I also think that it's really important to gather data to support that you can do both. So I think that a lot of people spend too much time, personal opinion, either talking about why they can't do these things because they cost too much money, or talking about why and by that I mean energy efficiency, optimization, sustainability measures in general. You know, I've spent way too long listening to people run at the mouth saying they cost a lot of money when they actually don't know how much these things cost at all, or how much they save, or all the other benefits that come with it, and what strong business case comes with a lot of this work. I think that if anything, the pandemic taught us that there's a qualitative aspect to this that's difficult to quantify, and I hope that the research will beef up in an effort to quantify the benefits that are currently seen as qualitative, things like risk, human health, wellness, productivity, death, which sounds silly, but these things are not well quantified. And in an industry where all of us, except for maybe Larissa, work for publicly traded companies, you know, there are shareholders that they're responsible to, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that the trend will be the continued balance of energy efficiency, health and wellness, and the demonstration that there's a business case, both a quantitative one and a qualitative one. We want people in our buildings, and we want them to be happy, productive, healthy, and safe. And there's no reason we can't do all of those things.
Great, thanks so much, Dana, and I appreciate you kicking off our Q&A. Jim, Larissa, or Kim, would you like to weigh in on this question?
I'll just add really quickly, Hannah, that two things. One, you know, I think Dr. Joe Allen at Harvard has told us all, either one or about a few hundred times over the past year, that the amount of energy that it takes to increase ventilation rates in a building is de minimis. So, you know, if health is paramount, which it is, then don't worry about the energy. It's really, you know, immaterial. The only other thing I would add is, and Hannah, you and I were on an earlier call today talking about our performance overall in the, you know, Better Buildings Challenge over the last year. And whereas we were averaging maybe 2% reduction in energy use a year previously, you know, last year we saw about a 6% reduction. And that's all over the board, from hotels, which were, you know, north of 50% in some cases, to multifamily buildings that were higher in some cases, and office buildings that were all over the board, you know, based on COVID occupancy. My point is, I don't really think we know. You know, the past year's not told us a lot about how buildings work, you know, in terms of energy performance during a pandemic. You know, we've got, they're all over the board. So I think time will tell, and particularly as folks start coming back to the office, you know, and some of these new technologies and protocols are in place, you know, I think a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll have a much better sense of what the energy impact is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would just finish up by saying that, you know, I think, and Larissa and others, you know, wellness has been part of the green building movement. And I would say that, you know, it really, unfortunately, took a situation such as this to really elevate it in importance. So with that, I would say that those things that have always been part and parcel of the green building program, ventilation, filtration, focusing on low VOC materials, cleaning, touch-free. Those are things that are built in, and built into green building, and they're also built into fit well and well. So I do think that those things will continue on.
Great, thanks, Kim and Jim and Dana. The next question we have on our list here is, what resources or tools help you navigate the health-energy intersection? And actually, Larissa, since you are representing one of our industry partners on this, I might kick this off with you if you have any suggestions. And actually, this one I think would be great for just a rapid fire if you have, top of mind resources that have helped you out on this.
Yeah, and I think this might relate to some of the other questions that we have further down for just balancing or better understanding filtration impacts versus increasing outdoor air. So I just want to mention, I think a lot of, if you're earlier in the design process, the energy modeling process can be used to kind of balance or understand different trade-offs. But there are some great tools that have been developed, a lot of them during the pandemic. Inverit has an energy estimator kind of tool that they have put together. And then we've also found through our pilot credit work, there's a lot of infection risk tools that have been developed. And so I can maybe add that to the chat, the links to those tools. But there's a lot of them that are really rooted in understanding transmission indoors and the different strategies that you can use and which ones might have better mitigation of the risk. And then we've also published recently a research anthology, which is really looking at green building strategies and health and looking at research that kind of backs up why you should pursue some of those strategies. So I'll put links to all of those in the, is it better to do the chat or the Slido for that, Hannah?
You can reply to someone's question directly on Slido, and I'll also say, Larissa, that we send out an email with this recording to everybody after the fact, so we can also include it like in Slide, the resource at the end, or links at that point.
Okay, great.
Would anyone else like to weigh in to share some resources or tools that have been helpful here?
Sure. I could say, of course, I'm sure everyone's following CDC. That's probably number one. A little bit on who, but then also specifically too, there actually was some great guidance and task force on the ASHRAE side that were put together with and specifically speaking to ventilation and filtration and sort of the myths, demystifying all of those pieces. So also happy to send those to you, Hannah, if we can distribute to folks afterwards. So
yeah, great. Thanks so much, Kim.
I just want to add to that yes, the ASHRAE core recommendations, I think we've all found were very beneficial during this whole process.
Right. And I would be remiss if I didn't note that the Better Buildings Solution Center does have a COVID-specific page that has some high-level information. And actually, Jim, because you mentioned Joe Allen, he was one of the plenary speakers in the Better Buildings Summit in 2020. So you can also catch some of what he had to say on the Solution Center. I think in the interest of time, I'll move forward so we can fit in a couple more questions here. Larissa, I know that you touched on this already with your last response, but the next question is directed towards you, which is, you mentioned building owners were finding it more energy efficient to increase filtration as opposed to ventilation. Do you know how this could be evaluated?
Yeah, so I think kind of same answer. Definitely could look at this during the energy modeling process, but for an existing building, I would point you to one of those resources that I'm adding to the previous question. So really there's a few kind of broader energy estimating tools that could be used. We have not developed any specifically for LEED, but there are some industry tools that are available for that process.
Allie, I think we actually already, what resources tools, we just addressed that one, so we can take those two off. And Jim, that bumps it down to a question that's directed to you, which is, Jim, seeing that you also touch equity goals, how does that factor into the health and energy efficiency conversations?
This is really part and parcel with the following question as well. Our buildings are all, multi-tenant buildings. They're not owner occupied. They're occupied by office tenants, multifamily residents, hotel guests, et cetera. It's been a difficult year for everybody, and really our goal is to keep existing tenants and residents comfortable with our efforts, and working to partner with them in terms of what they're doing within their premises, to the extent that we can, as well as thinking about new and prospective tenants and residents. So it's really at the end of the day, we want to keep our buildings occupied. We want to expand and renew and attract new tenants, and it's a tough environment out there, obviously for everybody. So it's really just a matter of partnership. At the end of the day, that's how we create value. Not by starting top down, but really bottom up.
Thanks, Jim. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to go off script a little bit here, because I'm also curious. This question asked, of course, about equity, and then it's relationship to health. And I don't think it's on the top screen here, but there's another question that was about how does water relate to the energy and health question? And Dana, that was something that I think was directed to you. So Ali, you're not going to have to, you don't highlight a question, but Dana, if you could just quickly talk about how water connects to the energy efficiency and health aspect.
Sure. So I don't see that question.
It's not, I know, it was further down, so it took a second to highlight it.
Just energy and water when it comes to health. So that's a great question. And there's two pieces. So I think this question is mostly focused on why do we care about water for the health of the occupants, which is a fair question. And I don't think people thought about it much unless they were people like Larissa, Kim, Jim, and me who had to think about that already. What we learned during the pandemic shutdown specifically is something that we did not ever have to deal with before, which is the risk of stagnant water in buildings and in systems. And people did not think about that. We started thinking about it right away, and Jim, Larissa, Kim might have thought about it also. It's something we didn't speak about much as an industry. We started acting on it right away because in New York City, we have really aggressive Legionella laws and legislation. There have been very, very few, but there have been terrible tragedies with people in residential buildings. And so we wanted to get right on that, because my engineers and I started talking once we were at the end of March and realized this would be more than a week or two, because really it's hard to imagine now, but when this first started as a shutdown, we thought it might not be long. And so we started talking at the end of March around what to do about water. If no one's running water, if no one's flushing toilets and no one's running sinks, you have a problem with stagnant water. And even though we are very rigorous in how hot we keep hot water tanks and things like that to prevent the growth of harmful pathogens, bacteria, et cetera, not all the water in the pipes is kept that way, right? And so we started making sure that on their rounds, because building engineers and staff were considered essential workers throughout, and we had them do rounds every single day of running, the last sink in the bathroom. We had them flush the last toilet in the line, make sure the water kept moving, so that we didn't have issues with stagnant water. And then before in New York, the lockdowns were different everywhere in New York City. We had a mandated lockdown except for essential workers from about mid-March till about mid-June. And so throughout that time, we did these rounds. And then we also did fully drained, cleaned, disinfected all the systems and retested all the water before reoccupancy. And so those are things I don't think people typically did. We didn't usually have to keep the water flowing because our occupants would have done that for us. We have done regular water testing twice a year as a standard. And one more thing I think people don't think about is that water use is highly tied to energy use in commercial buildings. So a smaller portion than you think is due to people flushing toilets and drinking water. The majority of the water use in the commercial buildings is actually for HVAC. So also an opportunity for savings.
Thanks so much, Dana. And with that, we are exactly at the top of the hour here. So I want to just highlight a couple of better buildings things. We are in the middle of our webinar series for Better Buildings, so I hope that you will join us for more of those sessions. In fact, the next one coming up is Energy Saving Success Stories, which is all from our Building Envelope campaign. So you can join us for that on July 27th. We also have on-demand webinars are available, including all of our recordings from the Better Buildings Summit last May, again on the Solution Center. And with that, you can bring our panelists. I want to thank you all so much. I know this has been a really trying topic over the last 2 years. We really appreciate you coming to the table and sharing these tools and resources and some of the stories from your portfolio or your work. So thank you so much. It was wonderful. And for all of our attendees, you'll be receiving an email when this is available online. So you can go through and get contact information or click links and watch the recording. So thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.